Welcome to the first edition of This Month in Payroll for 2024. I'm Rowan Geddes, National Leader of PwC's Payroll Advisory Practice, and I hope that everyone had a great end to 2023 and that your year has started well so far. In this month's TMIP, we'll discuss the surprise passing of the first tranche of the Closing Loopholes Bill, changes for the new year around employee authorised deductions and superannuation guarantee enforcement, the Fair Work Commission's mid-year performance report touching on its activity amidst a heightened level of industrial reforms, and developments in BHP's public holiday rostering case. But first, the Closing Loopholes Bill. In early December, the government unexpectedly decided to divide the Closing Loopholes Bill into two bills. The first bill, which included many of the non-contentious parts, such as making it easier for emergency services workers to claim for PTSD and protecting family and domestic violence victims from adverse action by their employers, was passed on the 7th of December. Included in that bill were two payroll-relevant changes being, one, the introduction of criminal penalties for wage theft and other rules aimed at minimising wage and superannuation theft, and two, wage protections for labour hire workers. The second bill, which is still being considered by the Senate, includes the introduction of minimum standards for digital platform gig workers, protections to make it easier for casual workers who want to become permanent workers, and, in a new development, the potential of an amendment that would provide Australian workers with a right to disconnect from unreasonable contact from their employer outside of work hours. So what's changed for wage theft? Well, the biggest headline-grabbing change is that the Closing Loopholes legislation has introduced a criminal offence under federal law, noting that Queensland and Victoria already have similar legislation, for employers who intentionally engage in conduct that results in the underpayment of employees' entitlements under an industrial instrument, a modern award, enterprise agreement, but not contractual entitlements. It also covers intentional underpayments of superannuation guarantee contributions or super entitlements that are owed under an award or an enterprise agreement. The introduction of criminal penalties will take effect from the 1st of January 2025, although this date will be pushed back if the Voluntary Small Business Wage Compliance Code, which sets out the steps that small business employers can take to avoid prosecution, is not enacted by then. Importantly, honest mistakes or miscalculations are not affected by the criminalisation laws. However, civil penalties have also been increased for underpayments which aren't related to intentional wage theft offences. In this case, employers could face penalties of up to $4.695 million for serious contraventions. Note that where there are two or more offences that arise out of a singular course of conduct, for the purposes of these penalties, they will be viewed as one single offence. While the headlines have been focused on the criminalisation of wage theft, there were other changes introduced in this legislation which are likely to be more relevant to this audience. First, provision was made for the Fair Work Ombudsman to publish a compliance and enforcement policy that includes guidelines on when the FWO will accept enforceable undertakings or enter into cooperation agreements. This provision is welcomed. Such guidelines will be useful for employers in understanding the expectations around self-reporting their discovered wage underpayments. The second change is that the Fair Work Act has been amended to allow the Fair Work Ombudsman to require the production of documents from any person who may be capable of giving information relevant to an investigation, and to extend the civil penalty provisions for false or misleading records, such as payslips, to cover this offence. This is a highly relevant introduction for payroll managers and officers who maintain custody over these records and will watch this space with interest. The second payroll-related change under the Closing Loopholes Bill affects labour hire workers. Under these changes, which were effective from the 15th of December, employees, unions and host employers are now able to apply to the Fair Work Commission for an order that labour hire employees must be paid at least what they would receive under a host employer's enterprise agreement or equivalent determination. The application is limited to arrangements that are only for the supply of labour rather than services, and will not apply where employees are working for a host business under a training arrangement or where the host is a small business employer employing fewer than 15 employees. In addition, there is a 3-month exemption period included in the proposal to minimise the impact on arrangements for surge work or where a short-term replacement worker is required. We now await the passing of the second instalment of the Closing Loopholes Bill, which should be up for debate over the next few months. New Year changes. 2 other payroll-related changes became effective over the new year as a result of the Protecting Worker Entitlements legislation. The first change is to employee authorised deductions. From 30 December 2023, employers will no longer be required to provide employers with a new written authority on each occasion that the amount of an authorised deduction varies. Instead, they will now be able to authorise payroll deductions via a one-off written authorisation that gives the employer permission to deduct money from their pay even where the amount can change from year to year. For a one-off deduction, the employee's written permission must state the amount, the reason, the date it will be made, and the name of the person who will receive the deduction. Where the deduction is a regular deduction, the written permission must also state whether the deductions are for specific amounts or for amounts that could change over time, and the date and the frequency of the deductions. Deductions have to be kept in an employee's record and shown on the employee's payslips. If the authorisation includes a specified amount, then a new written authorisation will be required to change the amount if necessary. And finally, the deduction can be withdrawn by the employee in writing at any time. The second New Year change is the inclusion of superannuation as an entitlement under the National Employment Standards. The NES entitlement to super covers SG obligations as well as extra superannuation obligations payable under an award or an enterprise agreement. It does not cover additional superannuation paid under the terms solely of an employment contract. This change gives most employees covered by the NES an ability to take court action under the Fair Work Act to recover unpaid super. However, the Tax Office continues to be the authority with the primary responsibility for ensuring SG compliance. Therefore, if the Tax Office has already commenced proceedings in relation to a superannuation underpayment, employees can't also take court action under the Fair Work Act. The Fair Work Ombudsman can, however, make referrals involving unpaid superannuation to the ATO. Fair Work Commission's mid-year statement. The unprecedented amount of IR reform that employers are currently experiencing is a sentiment that was echoed by the Fair Work Commission President, Justice Hatcher, in a statement released at the end of last year, when he called the introduction of the Secure Jobs Better Pay Act some of the most significant changes in the Commission's recent history. The Fair Work Commission mid-year statement provided an update on the Commission's operational performance so far for FY 23-24, how the Commission is responding to the government's initiatives around gender equality and job security, and how the Fair Work Commission is responding to the Secure Jobs Better Pay Act reforms. From an operational perspective, the Fair Work Commission notes that its caseload has been 13% higher than the average over the last 5 years, with a 28% increase in enterprise agreement approvals. Some of this increase can be attributed to the sunsetting of zombie agreements in December of last year, and also reforms to the enterprise bargaining approach included in the Secure Jobs Bill. Notwithstanding this increase in Fair Work Commission demand, turnaround times remain good, with 90% of cases finalised within about 11 weeks. Delivering on the government's gender equality initiative was also a focus of the Fair Work Commission statement. In the 2022-23 annual wage review, the Commission commissioned a research project to identify occupations and industries in which there is gender pay inequity and potential undervaluation of work and qualifications. Stage 1 of the report was released in November 2023, and the Stage 2 report is scheduled to be published in April 2024. This report will explore the history of wage fixing and work value assessments in 12 awards which cover industries affected by high levels of feminisation, such as nursing, teaching and retail, in order to aid the identification of any indicia of gender undervaluation. Justice Hatcher also noted that the Fair Work Commission has been requested by the government to focus on 4 areas arising from the Jobs and Skills Summit, being job security, where the modern award provisions support the objective of promoting job security and the need to improve access to secure work across the economy. Secondly, work and care, how award terms can impact workers with caring responsibilities. Third, making awards easier to use. And fourth, looking at modern award coverage and minimum standards for the arts and culture sector. Discussion papers on each of these topics were released in November and December, with submissions called for through to early February. We saw the government's initiatives already reflected in the Fair Work Commission decision last year to award aged care workers a 15% pay rise to reflect work value. So it will be interesting to see how these submissions affect future modern awards reviews. Looking forward, the FWC is responding to new or greater rights given to employees by the Secure Jobs Bill to lodge disputes affecting fixed-term contracts, flexible work, unpaid parental leave, and workplace sexual harassment. We have already seen a few cases on work from home rights last year, so further cases on the other matters are anticipated in the future. BHP's public holiday rostering case. In April last year, we spoke about a significant decision of the full bench of the Federal Court that had implications for employers rostering workers on public holidays. In the decision, the court concluded that employers of OSMCAP, a subsidiary of BHP, could not mandate employees to work on public holidays without first seeking the employee's agreement, even where a contract of employment, award or enterprise agreement suggests an employee may be required to work certain public holidays. The CFMMEU successfully argued that requiring these employees to work on a public holiday contravened one of the National Employment Standards and the Fair Work Act, which provides that employees are not required to work on a public holiday. Rather, the Fair Work Act allows an employer to request that an employee work on a public holiday, and the employee is allowed to refuse the request if it is not reasonable or if the refusal is reasonable. BHP, on behalf of OSMCAP, sought to challenge the ruling in the High Court. However, in December, the High Court rejected BHP's application, finding that the Fair Work Act permits an employer to request that an employee work on a public holiday and that a request can be refused if it is not reasonable or if the refusal is reasonable. The courts did say that, ultimately, after discussion or negotiation, the employer may require an employee to work on a public holiday if the request is reasonable and the employee's refusal is unreasonable. However, the discussion or negotiation is a key step in this process that clearly can't be ignored. Finally, I am delighted to announce that for our first Payroll Leaders Forum of 2024, we will be joined by Fair Work Ombudsman Anna Booth, along with Deputy Fair Work Ombudsman, Large Corporates and Industrial Compliance Group, Michelle Carey. Together, we will dive into the key focus areas of the Ombudsman for 2024 and the actions that employers should be taking to promote a cooperative and compliant workplace in this ever-evolving regulatory landscape. The live webcast is on 26th of March 2024 and will include the opportunity to ask questions to our special guests. The link to register is on your screen. And that's it for our first edition of This Month in Payroll for 2024. If you would like to revisit any of our prior updates, they are available on our website at pwc.com.au/payroll. And if you have any questions or need for support, please reach out to myself or your usual PwC contact. Until next time, have a great month in payroll.